All right. Aeneid Book 5, Funeral Games for Anchises. Alex and I talked through this yesterday. I think we'll probably just sort of run through the the overall sort of overarching narrative. And then there's a few things that I want to kind of pick at a little bit, and then we can kind of open it up to any questions or discussion. Or if we want to talk about the new Christendom games, we can do that too. Because this is the inspiration,
Yeah.
is this right here. So actually, we were just talking about Isker. Isker grabbed me at last year's New Christendom conference and was like, next year you should set up a competition between me and Eric Kahn, and we'll sell tickets, and it'll just be the two of us like heading it off. And then
Hmm.
that has so like that. There's been several things that have been in the back of my head for about a year
Yeah.
now that I'm like, I didn't realize it, but that have gradually turned into what we're doing now. So
Yeah.
pretty cool. Um,
That is cool.
but one of the main inspirations is this book. So, sort of setting the stage, we had at the end of book three, Anchises dies, and you have, as Alex described it yesterday, Aeneas beginning to sort of like flap in the wind. He is, in a way, he's sort of lost. He doesn't really know where he's headed, doesn't know what he's doing. He ends up falling into um, this side quest that he should have been on with Dido. Things go astray in Carthage. Part of that, obviously, is due to the gods meddling with Venus and Juno coming to this agreement to have Dido fall in love with Aeneas. The interesting thing that I will point out there is that there's nothing that happens to Aeneas directly. You don't have Cupid, manipulating Aeneas. He's just a man and just falls into this trap. Uh, Similar almost to like David. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing specific going on there. He just kind of gets pulled into this romance
Yeah.
with this woman he shouldn't be in a relationship with. She
They,
is very much tempted. He, other than just by natural means, not so much. What were you gonna say?
they both let their foot off the gas, but like there was no like they didn't have to do that. Like it's understandable. Like Aeneas's father dies, like things are a little, not quite as solid on solid footing. It's like, and like I've never been the king of anything, but like I can imagine like you get a certain level of like um wealth, you don't necessarily want to go march at the front of your army to war, but like David like sent his army away to war, and he was kind of hanging out, and like that opened the door. But yeah, no, like that was entirely on their own shoulders in both cases.
Yeah, they're utterly responsible for both of those falls, with both of those great kings. I think the thing that we also talked about yesterday was the fact that because he is such a great man, like we were just talking about the difference between the average guy who thinks he's competitive, who thinks that he's excelling, and then you find people that are actually elite, and you're like, oh, there's a difference here. Aeneas is very much in that, like, he is the elite of the elite. And because he is so special, um, things still tend to go about in this grand manner with his life just because he's such a grand man. And so that's just the way that things go for him. But that includes when things go badly. And so when things go badly with Dido, they go very badly. And you have this tragic death of this great woman who, when we meet her, is the epitome of queenliness and integrity and character and beauty and all of these things. And then Aeneas basically wrecks her entire life. So you have this massive misstep with him. And as they're leaving Carthage to set sail again, they actually, you see this in the beginning of book 5, that they can see the glow from the fire of Dido's funeral pyre as they're leaving. And Virgil makes this point here. He goes, a mystery, but the Trojans know the pains of a great love defiled and the lengths a woman driven mad can go. And so he's actually harkening back to Helen and the Trojan War, all of the things that went wrong that initially, including with Juno being slighted in the beauty contest, like all the things that led them to where they are now. And they're like, oh, we've seen this before. Like things can go really badly when these particular circumstances are in place. So that begins book 5. They sail. They're supposed to be headed to Italy. They land in Sicily, and so they land in the land of Acestus, who is actually also a Dardan descendant. So he's Trojan in a manner, but he's a man of Sicily. But he's an ally, and so they land on his beaches. And this is where you have um, Acestus is the son of a Trojan mother and the river god Crinisus. And the Virgil makes this point that he's never forgotten his lineage, but he is sort of this like bristling wild man. And it made me think of John the Baptist. He comes running down to the shore to meet them, and it's like this. He's just a wild, like a man of the wilderness kind of a thing. You could imagine him being something like John the Baptist, like eating wild honey and locusts. And he comes running down, bristling with spears. Like he's got like 7 spears with him when he comes running down to the shore. And anyways, he greets them, and at this point, they sort of realize this can be a bit of a reset. It's been a year since Anchises dies, which gives you some insight into how long they were actually in Carthage. Like they were there for a pretty lengthy period of time. It wasn't a short visit. Things had gotten very off mission during that period of time. At this point, they decide that they're going to honor Anchises on the funeral with funeral games, but first with feasting. And it's on the anniversary of his death. So he actually announces, like, this is where my father's bones are buried. We're going to honor him. First, there's 9 days of feasting. This part I think is particularly interesting because it's not really like overanalyzed in the book. There's some super like curious things that happen here. So they do 9 days of feasting. What Aeneas commands everyone to do is to invite their household gods, including the gods of Acestus' home, to feast with them during this ceremonial festival, which is literally a mirror. It's not oriented correctly, but it's a mirror of what we're doing on Sunday mornings with communion. The Lord literally invites us to the table to enjoy the ceremonial feast, the sacrificial feast with him. And so we sit and eat at table with our God at the end of worship. So super interesting here that you have this thing mirrored in this very Trojan Roman aspect. It's not Christian, but it's almost Christian, which is one of the beautiful things about myth. Is that, like, just like Ben Garrett always says, like, all myths are mirrors and shadows of the true myth. And so you can't get away from it. Like, even down to this very theological center of like what's happening in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ at the Last Supper, the institution of communion, all those things, like it's mirrored here in this quote unquote detached place. With that, you have them going to Anchises' shrine. He pours out blood, milk, and wine at which are all symbolically extremely biblical imagery, right? So you have blood, milk, and wine. He pours them out, and then a snake with 7 coils comes out, shining with this iridescent rainbow glow, and it tastes all of the things that are set on the altar, which is symbolic in Aeneas's mind. It's symbolic of Anchises in spirit joining with them in the feast. Super interesting. So like God's throne is surrounded by this iridescent light that is similar to the rainbow. When Noah gets the covenant from God, he sets his bow in the clouds and it's a rainbow. And so often you see this biblical imagery where God represents his light as this cascading, colorful, transcendent kind of light that we can't really mirror, which is why we have stained glass in churches, right? Like
Uh,
there's all of this connection going on. And then you see it here with Virgil in this Roman mythology where a snake, right? Like not a symbol of what we would say, like not a symbol of the triune God, but at the same time, this snake comes out with this rainbow colored glow to it and tastes the feast and is involved in the sacrifice with the people. So super super interesting. I think that's worth rereading if you've already read it. Like maybe going back through and rereading that portion of it and seeing if you pick up on any additional stuff there because it's fascinating. Um, After that, um, he announces that at the end of the feasting, if everything goes well, then they'll have games. Um, Soon after this, the games begin, and they start with a ship race. So the captains of the ship are soon to be ancestors of great Roman families in Italy. And you see this throughout the games. Whenever he announces the participants, he will often connect them not just to their heritage, like where they're from and their bloodline, the men that came before them, they will also connect them to their descendants and like who comes after them. So interesting to look at there because he's actually setting up for the Romans, like this is where you came from. This man that competed in the games at the funeral games of Anchises is your ancestor. This is where you came from. And so there's this lineage of glory that's sort of being portrayed here in both directions, connecting back to the Trojans in Troy and then reaching down through the generations to the Romans. Um, there's some interesting stuff that happens there in the ship race with the young hot-headed Gaius and the older wiser Menestheus and the way they sort of conduct themselves in the ship race, which is pretty telling and interesting. I will note, like every single one of the game's participants, like if you finish the race, or really like if you compete at all, you're given a prize. And so Aeneas doesn't compete, and instead he is very much more like one of the kingly figures out of Beowulf, who is the one who sits at the head of the mead hall and gives gifts to his men. So you have this connection there that's super interesting if you've ever read Beowulf. Very similar to what Aeneas is doing here with like being the he's the MC, he's the master of ceremonies, but he's also the giver of gifts. And so that's happening in every single one. Um, After the ship race, you have the foot race. After the foot race, you have the boxing match. And then after that, you have the archery competition. And then the final thing is what's called the Lusus Troia, which is not actually a competition, but instead is like this almost like a mock war dance that the young men do on horseback and is led by these very particular, once again, young men who will soon be the the birthplace of these great tribes and houses in Roman lore. So super interesting there. After, or really, this kind of cuts off the end of the Lusus Troia where they're going through their maneuvers on horseback. The young men are. You have Juno show up again. She sends, I believe it's Iris, down to tempt the women of Troy, who are sort of in this disheveled, distraught state. First of all, they're crying out and weeping and mourning for Anchises' death in honor of him, and then they're also sort of in this dejected state because they're just exhausted. They have been at sea, um, met by numerous trials, uh, like stalked by death in some sense for 7 years now after having left Troy burning behind them as they fled, and so they are sort of at the end of their wits. Like everything has become frayed, and their emotions are sort of running wild. And I think it's interesting. Alex and I talked about this, that in a very patriarchal world, this is the place where the gods seek to sow discord. It's like, okay, there's a weakness that we can exploit, and so Iris convinces them to set the ships on fire. They're like, we're not going back out there again. Like, we're not getting back on the ocean, which is interesting because we don't really think about this much in our modern day, but the ocean, the sea, in this particular myth, but also just in all old literature, especially the Bible, is always seen as this place of utter chaos and the end of man's dominion. He does not have the ability to wield power over the sea. It's unpredictable, it's extremely powerful, and it could kill you at any moment. And so when you see this actually at the very beginning of the chapter, they get out away from Carthage. They can no longer see Dido's funeral pyre. And he says, at all points the sea, at all points the sky. And it's this, in some sense, it's like this watery desert. It is desolation. Like, if you're not on this boat, you're dead. And so they're starting to feel the weight of this by the end of their voyage here. And it's exploited by Juno. Sets the ships on fire. Ascanius sees it and gets there first because they're on horseback. Aeneas shows up shortly after, and I think it's interesting. Ascanius sort of sort of at a loss, like, what are you guys doing? Why are we doing this? And like, what's driven you to this madness? Meanwhile, Aeneas shows up and immediately pours out his heart in prayer to the gods, and he knows like that it's almost like he inevitably knows that there's no chance that they're going to grab buckets and put out this fire. Like, there's nothing that he can physically do on his own. He immediately cries out to God. Jove sends a rainstorm and puts the fire out, and so they only lose very little of the fleet. And that part's particularly interesting. At that point, you have this division that takes place, and Aeneas is torn. He's sort of second guessing whether they should continue on to Italy at all, or whether they should just stay in Sicily and build a new Troy there. And an older man in his, from among his people, Nautus, speaks to him and gives wise counsel. And one of the things that he says is, whatever fortune sends, we master it all by bearing it all, which is one of my favorite lines in the entire book. The fact that you would master something simply by bearing the weight of it, and enduring it is the way to master some challenges. So you get that from Nautus, and then shortly after that, Anchises' phantom comes down, sent by Jove to give Aeneas counsel, telling him to take his best and bravest and continue on the journey to Italy. But first, he must meet Anchises. Aeneas must meet Anchises in the land of the dead, where he will learn his entire race to come and the city walls that will be made your own, is the quote there. So super interesting, sort of setting us up for the next chapter. But I kind of wanted to go over the main narrative there. Right after this, Aeneas is sort of resolved again. He sort of sets his face. He knows where he needs to go. He knows what he needs to do. They get back on the ships, and Venus comes down and petitions Neptune. Like, why can't someone like keep Juno out of the way? Basically, like, will nothing keep her from tormenting these people that she's already cast away from their homeland? And Neptune gives this interesting answer and says that he's always cared for Aeneas. Even when he wanted to see Troy destroyed, he still saved Aeneas, even from the hands of Achilles, back during the Trojan War. And so it's interesting. Neptune, once we just talked about the ocean, Neptune is the god of the ocean, right? And so he is the only one that can sort of wield power over the sea. And he predicts that one man will pay for the lives of many when they set out on the voyage. This comes true at the very end of the chapter when Palinurus, who is sort of the ship captain, the leader of the fleet, is attacked by the god of sleep and thrown overboard to his death. Aeneas wakes up and realizes the ship is off course, goes to the rudder and kind of takes over things. And then from there on, it's very much like it's the Aeneas show. It's not up to anyone else. Like, this is on you. You've got to go do this, including going to the land of the dead. Like, you must cross the river Styx. You have to go to the land of Elysium and meet with Anchises. This is on you now. But that's sort of the main narrative of the whole thing here. We talked a little bit about the offerings and the sacrificial ceremony towards the beginning, all the feasting and how that sort of ties in with communion. But I think the main thing that we kind of want to talk about here is the games themselves, because they're sort of attached to what we're doing and what we're sort of focused on at the moment, especially. And so there's some interesting stuff here. The games are not just feats of raw strength or power, or they're not stupid, I guess, is like they're not dumb. They are very in a way like sophisticated. um, each one has a lot of gamesmanship to it, a lot of style, finesse, skill involved. Obviously, rowing an entire boat with an entire team of men in a race is going to be something that involves a lot of teamwork and leadership and know-how. There's a lot of skills involved. Then after this, you have the foot race, which very much seems like it's going to be just like this. Okay, well, whoever's the fastest, until the man who's in front slips in blood and gore from the sacrifices and lands up on the ground. And then very quickly, this foot race turns into a bit of a wrestling match. So weren't really expecting it, but all of a sudden the foot race has become combat. And he throws himself in front of the second place guy in order to trip him, not just because he was like trying to be spiteful, but because third place was his best friend. And he wanted his best friend to win. And like he's like, if I'm not gonna win it, then I want my buddy to win it, and takes out the guy who was gonna get first. What's interesting there is we talked about this yesterday, but like they don't like rerun the race. They don't like reset everything and go, okay, hang on, that was against the rules. That's it. Like
Yeah.
that's the
They don't
race.
even punish the guy who did it.
No. In fact, the crowd and Aeneas himself is won over, and they actually love him more because he did that for his friend. Like he actually is praised for this act of what you would might call like cheating, because it was so that his friend could win. And they're like, like they're thrilled about it. They're like, this is great. And I just find that super. It is so the opposite of what our modern sensibilities would do. All of us would immediately be like, well, okay, well, what are the rules? Is that allowed? Like, he's not allowed to do that. We got to rerun it. We got to, or that guy should get first just because he was tripped. Like we would come up with all of these qualifications and all of these extra rules instead of just going, how's the outcome? Like, is what it is. You shouldn't have got tripped. I don't know. Like, it's just a very different way of doing things. So I thought that was super interesting.
Oh yeah.
Particularly the boxing match is, I think, kind of the highlight of the chapter. I don't know if you felt that way, Alex, but
Yeah, certainly from like I'll say a shallow perspective, but just like as you're kind of like reading through without like doing any deep dives into like the stuff that we talked about. Like I don't, you don't have to read super closely or even be like particularly good at reading classic literature to like be able to like, oh, whoa, what's going on here? Like that's yeah, it's like the highlight for sure, like the exciting part that just kind of grabs you.
so he begins this, Aeneas does, by saying, let any man with heart, with fire in his chest, come forward, which is just the most base thing that I've ever heard in my life. You have Dares, who is a champion of Troy, step forward. He basically prances around in the ring for a little bit and can tell no one really wants to fight him, and is like, hey, just give me the prize. Like, I don't have to kill anybody. Like, just give me my prize and we can be done with this. At which point, Acestus, who's the bristling wild man of Sicily, looks at his buddy Entellus and is like, hey, you just gonna let him do that, or are you gonna go smash his face? Like, what's going on? And Entellus sort of gives this short speech, and you can tell, I just love this because like this is the way that men work. Entellus was thinking the entire time, like, I could smash this guy, but I'm old and I'm not as confident as I once was. And so when he is poked about it, that's what comes out immediately. Like there's no second guessing it. He's like, listen, back when my blood flowed a little hotter and my joints didn't creak, he was like, there wouldn't need to be any prizes. Just smashing him would be enough reason for me to go down there. And you're like, man, immediately you like this guy. Um, so at that point, sort of at the end of his short monologue, Virgil uses the very short, this might be the first time this is ever used, but he just says fighting words, which is one of my favorite. Just like Entellus says this, and then Virgil just goes fighting words. At which point Entellus stands up and throws his gauntlets, so his boxing gloves essentially, into the ring. Very different from the boxing gloves that we use. These were like made to hurt people rather than protect them. And so it's 7 layers. Once again, this number comes up. 7 layers of rawhide that are overlapped and then sewn in with metal. Iron is literally, they're going to box each other with brass knuckles, basically. And he throws his into the ring, and everyone is somewhat shocked because of the size of them. Everyone's like, those don't look like Derry's mitts, right? Like his gauntlets look different than everyone else's. The reason for that, and he mentions this, is that Entellus possesses the gauntlets of Eryx. Eryx is this legendary figure. He was also the son of Venus, making him Aeneas's half brother. Okay, so Eryx was the half brother of Aeneas, and he was the ruler of a region in Western Sicily. In his lifetime, he was known for his exceptional strength and skill in boxing. He was ultimately killed in a boxing match against Hercules. Okay, so Hercules is literally the son of Jove. He is a demigod. Eryx is a lower status demigod, and the only reason that most people haven't heard of Eryx is because Hercules was there, right? And so you sort of have these figures throughout, cultural competitions forever. But like when you talk about the Chicago Bulls, you talk about Michael Jordan. They had a bunch of phenomenal Hall of Fame players, but they also had Michael Jordan. And so when you talk about them, you talk about Michael Jordan. Dennis Rodman's arguably one of the greatest defensive basketball players in history, right? But Michael Jordan's on the team. And so you don't talk so much about Eryx because he was killed by Hercules, right? However, Eryx was incredibly impressive, and Entellus has his gauntlets. And so he actually states this to Aeneas when he comes into the ring. He's like, those are your brothers. Like, those are the gauntlets that your brother wore. They still have brains and like splattered gore on them from him smashing people. And at this point, Derry's blood turns a little cold. And so you have the Sicilian versus the Trojan, and the Trojan starts getting a little worried. Aeneas recognizes that this is not going to be a fair match if he lets Entellus use the gauntlets that he's brought, which belong to Eryx. And he decides to give them both new gauntlets that will sort of even the playing field. They start the match, and Derry's a very skilled boxer, and he's sort of circling Entellus and taking a bunch of jabs, and they're kind of feinting and kind of going back and forth and feeling each other out. But I think he describes Entellus as like almost like an oak tree that's simply waiting to fall. And he finally takes this big haymaker and misses, and he throws himself on the ground. And so it's his own force that throws him down. And everyone sort of erupts in the crowd, which obviously makes Entellus angry. And so when he gets back up, there's an onslaught that takes place that Derry's cannot withstand. And Aeneas ends up cutting the fight short to save Derry's life because Entellus was just going to kill him. And it was not actually like, it seemed like maybe it was going to be a close match at first, but in the end was not at all. It wasn't even close. At this point, Derry's friends pick him up. He's spitting out blood and teeth and drag him away. And one of them has to come running back to get the second place prize from Aeneas for him because he's about to die. And so they drag him off. Entellus is still not quite at the end of his rage. And so the blood's still hot, adrenaline's still high. Aeneas presents him with the prized bull for first place, and he turns and punches it in the face and kills it with a punch, which is like there's lots of cool stories, like guys getting cut completely in half with a single sword stroke and stuff like that. But I don't know how many men that like live in legend because they punched a bull in the face and killed it. Like he punches this thing between the eyes and it falls dead. It's just one of the wildest, like coolest scenes in the book, in my opinion, is the boxing match. So pretty cool. Alex, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to mention there, but
No, that was pretty much it. Definitely, yeah. The highlight for sure. Yeah, I thought interesting how scared everybody was of Darius and like how he was kind of like lauded as the champion. No wasn't anybody even going to come out and face him, and then you know somebody does, and not only do they, but they his friends have to carry him away as he's spitting out his own teeth after the fact.
yeah, it's really good.
And
One of
and
my
again, that's just like okay and normal. And that's just like, well, that's the sport. Um, and just which would offend our modern sensibilities for sure.
yeah
You look at even sports that are supposed to be have a decent amount of violence and your precautions taken and whatnot. Like, well, that's just what did you think you were signing up for?
yeah
You're punching each other in the face.
yeah
Yes, you're probably gonna spit out some blood and teeth.
yeah yeah. I mean, he literally did say like any man with heart with fire in his chest.
Yeah, which like automatically the opposite of that would also have to be true. So like you know if you don't have any like will to victory or like if you're just a huge loser, like go ahead and stand there.
Yeah, yeah. Like, don't come out here. Like,
Yeah, like
not for you.
yeah, as he immediately as he says that, like, and it's also because that's true, but like everybody was just like, you know what? No, it's okay. I'm I do not have, I don't have the fire in my chest. It's all right. Let's stand back here.
Yeah. Um, the archery competition is super interesting too. Aeneas sets a dove, so he actually tethers a dove to one of the masts of the ship, and the first shot, I believe, hits the mast, and the second shot actually hits the tether, so shoots the tether that the dove is hanging from, and so the dove isn't hit, which is the target, but the dove is now flying away. The third archer very quickly pulls and shoots the dove from the sky with his bow, which is like, okay, well, that's the end of it. Nobody's topping that. At which point, Acestus, who's kind of thrown his hat in the ring here, is like, well, what am I going to do? Like, shoot it now that it's on the ground, Like, so he just takes his bow and draws back and shoots an arrow into the sky, just like, hey, I'm going to participate. And the arrow bursts into flame and burns out like a shooting star. And Aeneas loses it and is like, "You're the winner." like you've been blessed by the gods. That's a sign. He was like, "It was really impressive that you shot that dove out of the sky, but his arrow literally burned out in fire in the sky. Like, this is a whole different level." And that part was super interesting. It's this sign from Jove, and I'm sure there's more historical context that we could kind of pull on there, about Acestus and then what takes place in his lineage afterwards. And I'm sure Virgil's doing something there, but I didn't go that far down the rabbit hole. At that point, I do find it super interesting that Aeneas calls Acestus father. And it's this very high watermark of respect and honor and adoration that Aeneas immediately has for Acestus. Like he already was had him in a place of honor, but this sort of escalated things for him suddenly, and he calls him father and pours out gifts for Acestus when that takes place. Okay, the Lucis Troia. So this is the Roman name for the mock battle exercise that Ascanius leads. Super, super interesting. So the Lucis Troia was continued on in Rome for generations, and it was led just this way. You had young elites who would lead their units in this mock war scenario. It was done during festivals and funeral rites and games and things like this. Each time that it was done, it was sort of almost like a military parade procession kind of thing, almost like what you could think of as today's military parades, where maybe family members come and see the graduation of their sons, getting their green berets or getting their ranger tabs or whatever you want to, whatever example you want to use. But it's a show of force in a mock scenario that shows the discipline and the coordination and the teamwork and the leadership of these young men that have been training really hard without them bloodying each other to death, right? So it's called the Lucis Troia. And then in Rome, generations later, they actually called the troops Trojans. So the dance was called Troy. It's the Lucis Troia. So it's this ode back to the Trojan lineage and Aeneas specifically, because Ascanius is Aeneas's son. And so what they were doing in Rome when they would go through this was honoring their heritage and their lineage and going, we are Rome because we are Troy. And then also continuing on this generational cycle down of great warriors, martial spirit and virtue, as well as the sort of kingliness and the godlike descendants of Aeneas. And so they're continuing this on even in Rome. And so Virgil's doing this thing here where he's sort of connecting the present day where he's at to this historical narrative in the myth. Super, super interesting. You also find out here that the three leaders of the three troops for the Lucis Troia are Ascanius, whose other name, if you remember, is Ilius or Iulus, however you want to say it. But soon, well, not soon, but down the line, known as the forebear of Julius Caesar. And so you have Ascanius, who is Iulus, who will someday bear the great great grandson, who is Julius Caesar in Rome. Next, you have Priam, who is the grandson of Priam from Troy. So the king of Troy's grandson is also participating here, who will have a very significant lineage in Rome. The third guy is also extremely interesting. His name is Aetus, and he is the beginning of the line of Ateans. And so Virgil's suggesting here that Aetus is the ancestor of Atia, who is the niece of Julius Caesar and also the mother of Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And so what he's suggesting is that in Caesar Augustus, you have the meeting of these two great lines of men. These two great bloodlines come together in one man, and that one man is Caesar Augustus. And so you have the first, their first images of their ancestors and displayed right here in this mock war with Ascanius and with Aetus, and their bloodlines join in the man of Caesar Augustus, which is fascinating. So That's my favorite historical portion of this chapter is that part right there. I could just keep talking about all the details of this, but we don't have to do that. I think we've covered most of it. Anything that you think that we need to touch on again, Alex?
I don't know about touch on again. Another like just quick kind of interesting tidbit, I guess, like the Lucius Troia, like that, not necessarily in name, but in practice, like even past the fall of Rome, continued. Like all the great armies of Europe would do that as well, because Rome did it. But this sort of military parade event, kind of showcasing the skill stats like that. For blanking on the appropriate period specific term, but yeah, that continued because of what Rome was doing, honoring Troy through, into the world wars.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Like, when Roosevelt was in Europe after he had been president, he had to go and review the French army doing this, and then within like a month, he was in the Reich doing the same thing with Kaiser Wilhelm, like reviewing their troops. Essentially doing this exact same thing.
Super interesting. So
Yeah.
the lineage doesn't stop. This is carried down, and it's not by coincidence. It's not just that like, oh, this is just what armies do. No, this is a piece of the Western ethos. This is a portion of Western heritage itself that does this. That puts on this ceremony, this regal ode to patriotism. So not just to your king and your country, but to your land and to your gods. And this is how we put on this masculine virtue and show it through this martial spirit in a display of discipline and coordination. And even the games themselves, you see all the way down through medieval Europe, like knights tournaments where men would show up and joust, where they would have archery competitions. All of those things are descended from this. They're descended from these Roman Trojan games, all the way down to today, where you have Greco-Roman wrestling, which is a descendant of Trojan grappling. And so all of this stuff connects all the way back. And so even the thing that we're sort of getting ready to try to mock and hopefully imitate is an ode and is connected back all the way to this. It's not just like this thing that we thought would be cool and fun and like, hey, we should just have a physical competition. It's like, no, this is actually connecting us back to our Western heritage in a way. And it should be Christianized. We should redeem it and do it in a righteous way. But the thing that was being done was good. And we can continue on this good ethic of Western heritage through these physical displays of martial virtue in a way that is honoring to God, to our people, to our heritage, and then also shows us, obviously connects us back, but I think it also is something that is extremely special to have your sons watch you compete.
Yeah.
There's something about that it's extremely a special thing. And we sort of have handed this over to a very secular pagan portion of our culture today, where NFL football is all about ratings and reviews and eyeballs, how much money we can get attached to it. NFL, NHL, all of these things are descendants of this, and all of it in some sense is mock war. That's the idea, is that you would be fighting one another, but not to the death. That's literally what the game of football is. That's what wrestling is. That's what MMA is. All of it is this. And so I think that it's something that, like, it's not going away. You can't just stomp it out and act like men aren't men anymore, and that they don't have the desire for glory, that they don't have fire in their chest, that they don't have the skills that obviously they have. And so what we should do instead, rather than trying to act like it's not there, is to cultivate it in a good way. So that's kind of the mission right now with a lot of what we're doing with the new Christendom games, but even with the Brotherhood itself. Like, this is the idea, is that like we should be cultivating these things because they are good, but they should be rightly ordered as well. So yeah, cool. Well, this sets us up for book 6. Um, next we get to see Aeneas travel to the underworld, the journey that he has to take even to get there, and then some of the stuff that he sees while he's there is extremely interesting, and once again has a significant historical context to it. So
Yeah, which and you and I kind of talked about this yesterday, but like in a sense, that's kind of where the story ends almost, like the or at least like the for Aeneas's perspective, like that's where like after that point, like he has everything he needs, and then it's just fulfilling destiny, the will of the gods. Like up until there's once now that they're sailing after the funeral games, like he's like on sort of back on the appropriate heading. But certainly once he returns from the underworld, there is no more wavering. There's no more question of like, well, am I going to Italy? What should I be doing? You know, this is difficult. I wish my father were here. Or it's just he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do because he's supposed to do it. And then like, some of the cooler parts of the story in similar ways to like how the boxing match was like, entertaining to read about. Like, there's a lot of that in the back half of the book, but like, I don't know, you know exactly what's happening, what's coming, and it does. Like there's other characters that develop and stuff like that, but like from a like ultimate, like exactly where the story is heading. After like his trial in a lot of ways, at least internally, is resolved between these games and his visit to the underworld.
yeah, there are some really entertaining scenes towards the end. Turnus honestly might be my favorite character. Um, he's he's just the ultimate villain.
Yeah,
Incredible bad guy. Um, but yeah, I think it's interesting if you guys want to sort of like read this through a lens. In some sense, at the end of book 3, when Anchises dies, Aeneas loses his faith, and so his faith falters and wavers. And from there, there's a massive amount of uncertainty. We talked about this in the Refuge Men's book club last night. We were trying to define what is faith, and then what is maybe not its direct opposite, but like maybe one of its counterparts, which is fear. So what is faith? What is fear? And so we sort of got down to, well, faith is certainty in a thing maybe not yet seen, but regardless, it's a level of certainty that you have. And so when Anchises dies, Aeneas loses all of his certainty. He has become faithless in a sense, and that's what it's what Alex is sort of saying when he says he's sort of flapping around in the wind and he doesn't really have a heading. In this next book, we see, in some sense, there's a theme of death, burial, resurrection happening. And in that process, there is the regaining of faith. And through the regaining of faith, the regaining of certainty in Aeneas. And that's what Alex is sort of talking about when he's like, it's almost as if the story's over. Because once Aeneas comes back out of this experience, his faith is renewed. He is utterly certain, and we already know the outcome. Like, from there, there's no stopping what's coming. This man is on a mission. He's the kind of man who is faithful. He is duty bound. He is pious. And once his faith is renewed and his certainty is set back in place, there's really nothing that can stop him other than the gods, and the gods are on his side. And so you sort of see that theme happening through the next book. So kind of pay attention to that. This sort of renewing of faith, renewing of certainty, death, burial, resurrection, And then, as always, throughout the entire book, this theme of lineage and like, where have you come from? What's your heritage? And then where are you going? Where are we headed with all of this? Not just in your life, but through your bloodline. And how are your actions going to continue to, like Gladiator, like echo down through eternity in this temporal life? Where are we going with you, not just as a person, but as a people? So cool. Appreciate you guys listening to all of this. Hopefully you get something out of it. And yeah, ask us any questions during the week if you notice something that you want to talk more about. So I'll go ahead and stop this recording and we'll be good to go.